In this video, I will reveal to you the plot of all games that were ever created and will be created in the future, because all of them use more or less the same set of rules to guide the player through the story. So all games start with a player's character at their lowest point. They have no items, no money, sometimes the player might not even have their freedom.
Hey, you're finally awake.
If you start as someone successful and powerful at the beginning of the game, you can be sure that you are about to get in trouble and lose all you have during the first minutes of gameplay. Because the story is always about progressing. Most humans consider themselves as simple people, so protagonists must start low to be relatable. Protagonist is usually a regular powerless character, has no skills, no weapons, and of course is at level 1. From the very beginning, the plot will reveal to you what is the main problem of the game and what you need to do in order to solve it. There might be a planet that must be saved, a weapon that fell into wrong hands,
Iran is in possession of American missiles.
or more commonly, a strong monster, the main boss, that must be defeated, because he is very evil and poor NPCs are suffering. Most importantly, the problem has to be very difficult or even impossible to solve. The contrast between the protagonist's current state and the difficulty of the end goal usually makes it obvious that the main character cannot solve the problem right away. He has to transform into a state where he becomes strong enough to overcome the main challenge of the story. This progression can take many forms. In some games, you might simply need to repeatedly press buttons and your in-game character gets physically fit. In others, you might need to meet a level requirements. But progression is not only character stats increase. Progression in story may require many conditions to be met. For example, in order to defeat a world-eating dragon, you must acquire a special weapon, Dragon Run Shout. But first, you need a specific information where to find this shout. And in order to get the information, you have to ask someone who knows. And that someone who knows doesn't trust you enough to tell you.
Before I tell you any more, I need to make sure I can trust you.
So first you must help them to resolve their problems, and even that might not be enough, as apparently you cannot learn the shout without becoming blind, so you have to find a way around that as well. Since a blind shouting dude is not the most efficient dragon slayer. Each of these small challenges on your way to the final one usually is a small story arc on its own, because it follows the same basic rules. Someone is in trouble, you help them, evil is punished, and you are rewarded with items or information that is necessary to progress further towards the main task. Sometimes you'll find short story arcs along your way that are not even related to the main story. These are side quests.
Fine, I'll get your goat.
Usually, but not always, they are much more simple and don't have significant consequences in the game world. But it's very important that these quests still help the protagonist to become stronger and bring him a little closer to the stage where he is able to defeat the final boss. Side quests can reward you with money, weapons, skills, and so on. Usually something that is not essential to complete the game, but it makes combat easier or more convenient. Character's progression usually is not consistent. Since the progression towards the end goal can take many hours, gradual increase in power might become too predictable. And predictable means boring. That's why every good story needs a plot twist from time to time. Usually, unexpected turns of events can be split into two types: gameplay and plot. In case of gameplay, developers create a situation I'm sure you've experienced in many games, where the main character suddenly loses his powers or becomes unable to use his weapons. Usually the plot will explain it as being left for dead, someone stealing all your gear, or being cursed so that you cannot cast magic anymore.
I can smuggle some equipment into the embassy for you.
The point is that the player is thrown into a situation that you were not prepared for and you have to adapt in a new environment. Usually it forces the player to use the tool that you have never used before, such as knife or sidearm in shooter games, or knuckles if you are a magic user. As you learn to fight in new conditions, most of the time the protagonist will be returned to the level of power he had before.
Your gear is in that chest.
Story plot twist might have no effect on gameplay, but it changes the direction you have to go or creates a new obstacle, making the end goal look unreachable again. There are plenty of games, especially open world, where you seem to get so close to your final enemy, but there is a door that you cannot unlock or a portal that needs to be opened.
You were unable to enter the Erd tree, no?
Usually that sends the player to explore new lands in search of key or magic spell, basically to grow in power and transform from someone who cannot proceed further into someone who can. Alternatively, the main problem of the game might change drastically into something totally different than what you were told it was. It might appear that the end goal is not even real or that it was here with you all along. But such radical plot twists usually happen closer towards the climax. Culmination is reached usually during the final battle, where all players' knowledge, stats, and item upgrades are put into test against the main enemy. Depending on your previous actions, you might have unlocked something that helps you against this specific endgame boss. Maybe you helped someone before who is now fighting alongside you. Or maybe someone shared information on how to use the boss area to your advantage, or you were given the tool to make the boss weaker. Most of the time the final boss is the most difficult fight. The final enemy has the most health, deals the most damage, and so on. Climax is almost always peak of player's power. Even if the protagonist becomes stronger later on, it doesn't really matter, as after this fight there are no serious challenges left. Which finally brings us into the resolution stage, which concludes the main story of the game. After the battle is won and the world is saved, the game will let you know what was the player's impact on the outcome of the story. Usually this is where you get the longest cutscenes that reveal the fate of characters you met before. Depending on the story, life in the game world returns to normal, there are no more bad guys left, and all secondary story arcs are peacefully resolved. Or the whole world is destroyed and everyone dies. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, increase your character's power, and try to save the world.
Do I make myself clear?